Good morning. We have another busy 24 hours of news. How are you? How are you doing with all of this? There's a lot of news swirling from all around the world and even closer here at home. So, with some of the developments, I just wanted to jump on real quick and give you a little bit of the play by play of what we saw just yesterday on Monday, and then what to really pay attention to over the next 24 hours that could take us the story that we're watching in Eastern Europe in a few different directions. We also have some developments on COVID that I want to also introduce that affects not only what's happening inside your own household, but potentially has an impact on immigration policy. So we'll connect the dots here a little bit, but hope you're doing well wherever you are. So let's get started on what we're learning about Eastern Europe, one of the big top global news stories. There was a major meeting yesterday with Russian President Vladimir Putin and some of his top officials. And during this meeting, Russia recognized the independence of two areas in this contested spot in Ukraine. We call this the separatist-backed areas of Ukraine, or separatist-controlled areas. And I'm going to show that to you on a map in just a moment. But we got a readout from the meeting from this was several hours long. President Putin also spoke publicly, really for the first time, mapping out Russia's in one sort of sitting, mapping out Russia's position on what's actually happening in Ukraine. And so I want to take the foreign ministry's statement from yesterday and just work through a couple lines with you, because I think it's important for you to know exactly what they're saying. Now, this is a translation. I wish I spoke Russian. As any of you know that speak multiple languages, there are nuances that sometimes aren't really picked up in the translation. So we'll leave a little space for that. But here are some of the things I think really kind of stand out to me from this statement. So the first line in particular, that the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, signed an executive order recognizing these two specific areas as sovereign and independent states. Sovereign and independent states. These are the areas inside Ukraine. Now, he's falling short of saying these are officially Russian states. He's saying these are sovereign and independent states. Why is he saying that? Goes on and says the president of Russia took this decision primarily on humanitarian grounds and to protect the civilians there, including hundreds of thousands of Russian nationals, from the real threat to their lives and security posed by the current Ukrainian regime. So let's translate that. Humanitarian grounds and to protect civilians. What Russia's saying is, this is not offensive. This is defensive. We're not trying to go in there and do anything except to protect people. We're actually forced into this position. This is Russia's stance. Let's go on a little bit more because it gets more specific. As Russia's going through sort of the history of this area, this is what it said. Thousands of innocent people, including children, died, and tens of thousands were wounded in this particular area because of an all-out transport and economic blockade and violence. Basically, these people are facing from artillery and mortar fire. These actions were nothing short of a genocide against Ukraine's own people. Goes on to also say people in these republics face the threat of direct physical annihilation. So this is Russia again justifying these are humanitarian grounds. We are there to protect people that have their past tied directly to Russia. We're there for them. We're there because they've been suffering. Now, obviously, the other side of this is that Russia went into Ukraine in 2014. Russia calls what happened in Ukraine at that time an illegal coup of the Ukrainian government. Others would say those are the Ukrainian people rising up against a corrupt government that was tightly controlled or tightly tied to Russia to have their own destiny. So you have two different pictures of this. But this is the statement from Russia leading off the week about why they have to recognize these states and how they are going to defend the sovereignty of this particular area. Let me go ahead and show you the area one more time because it's nice to see on a map. The separatist controlled area is that area in red. At the very bottom of the map, you see Crimea, annexed by Russia, meaning really they have control of Crimea. So why are we not saying annexed? Why is that separatist controlled area not annexed? Because they've never officially taken control of that area. They've never said this is officially ours. They're actually not doing that in this statement either. They're saying this is an area with ties to Russia and these people are innocent and they're being hurt and therefore we are going to defend the sovereignty of it. Now, the question one of the things we're going to be watching is what actually happens in this area. We're seeing a lot of different reports this morning from even high-ranking European officials either calling what Russia's doing right now an invasion of Ukraine or saying it falls short of an invasion of Ukraine. Why does that matter? Because there's been a lot of talk from everybody, including the United States, about what could happen if Russia invades. But if it's not an official invasion, or how would you define an invasion? That's sort of where we're at this point. There are a variety of reports not confirmed about the Russian military sort of moving into this area. Maybe we have further confirmation later today, but we know this area has been a part of a lot of conflict with Russian-backed separatists, meaning that these are militant groups that are backed by Russia that are functioning in this area. So is it more action from them, or is it actually officially the Russian military going in? Because that would that a real difference if it was actually the Russian military moving in. That's something that we need to watch. I know I bring this topic up a lot. I can't help it because it provides context for the violence that we've seen in this area. We've talked about the Malaysian Airlines flight that was shot down, a passenger plane that was shot down over Ukraine by Russian-backed separatists. This was during the last invasion in 2014, an invasion that Russia would not use that same term. But again, that was Russian-backed separatists that did that. And so Russia had plausible deniability. Well, that wasn't us. That wasn't Russia. That was I don't know. Those were those other militants, or those were other people. We don't have in control of them. They're fighting for their independence. So again, there's a little bit of room there, even with the Russian statement from yesterday, not necessarily fully taking this area into a bear hug and saying this is ours, but saying, no, these are independent sovereign areas that we're going to help. We're going to help. Now, one thing I want you to look here at this map. You can see it's by the Black Sea, the separatist controlled area. Not only are we watching to see if it's officially the Russian military that's going to move into this area, officially marked, we know this is Russia going in there. But do we see even the Russian-backed separatists try to control a little bit more outside of this already controlled area? Do they try to push a little further? Perhaps, one of the thinkings is look at where Crimea is. Do they want that coastline? Is that eventually what maybe strategically could be something to watch? So those are a couple things I want you to pay attention to today, and I'll keep you updated on that. In the meantime, we have the United States with their own statement from the State Department. This is by the Secretary of State, Blinken, and the news from overnight is that the Department of State actually took its citizens that were working at the embassy there. They're not calling it an evacuation, but they're saying Department of State personnel that were in Ukraine spent the night in Poland, and that they're going to go back and forth to do their diplomatic work or consular work. So that's something to note. Also, they're reiterating that U.S. citizens depart Ukraine immediately, and they're setting up sites all across the border in different areas of Ukraine where Ukraine borders up against a different country to try to help those U.S. citizens that would like to leave. So that's the situation as it stands today. I was looking just briefly to see if we see any sort of news of press conferences or press briefings from the State Department, Pentagon. I don't see any yet. That quickly changes. Sometimes you only get like an hour heads up. So we're going to be watching to see who actually speaks today, if we have anybody officially on the record, or if there's a wait by the international community to really understand, okay, Russia issued this statement, but what are they actually going to do differently here? What does that actually look like? So that's where I'm going to pause that story for a moment. In the meantime, I just want to pick up, and if you have questions on that, hopefully that's helpful to get a little bit of the Russian perspective. I put the transcript from what happened in the meeting yesterday with Russia, their transcript that they're providing on our website so you can read it for yourself. Now, real quick, I just want to touch on this because this is something that, again, we always look for patterns of information, patterns in reporting. We could say that's double sourcing, but as we're seeing an even quickly developing world, again, the patterns are what you're watching for, because if you see a pattern of information, it gives me more credence to follow the trail there. So a couple things. One of the things you're seeing a lot of is you're seeing COVID policies being pulled back. We're seeing that in the UK. We're seeing that in Australia. While you're seeing that because of declining cases, I want you to also know that we're seeing rising cases in other parts of the world. Hong Kong, for example, is putting forward some policies that are mass testing, for example, and shutting down travel because they're seeing a really high rise of COVID cases or that particular area. So you're seeing both around the world. That's notable. Second thing that I think is also really important to know is that about a week ago, we covered a study that was published in Nature, the Journal of Nature. And it was a study about cardiovascular effects in the aftermath of COVID. What the study was saying is that researchers saw that anybody, really in any age group, race, pre-existing conditions was at a higher risk for cardiovascular issues after a case of COVID for the next year. Now, the Washington Post has a huge article today on this topic. So this topic is actually gaining more steam. They're talking about the research, but they're actually interviewing more doctors and what doctors are seeing. This is really important because it's not just about people that have heart issues, if they're having an arrhythmia or they're having chest pain, something that you'd really attribute to a cardiac issue. There's also a question about whether or not cardiac issues related to COVID is causing that fatigue. I'm sure some of you have had COVID yourself or have friends or family that had COVID that talk about fatigue in the weeks following. Like they have this real fatigue. And that's kind of on the minor symptoms on the scale of symptoms from that to like a real full-blown cardiovascular issue. But it's sort of in the same sort of developing body of research. And because so many of us have had experiences with COVID, I think that's a really important topic to note, that it's actually gathering momentum. This question of, well, what does this virus do that could be potentially unique to the heart? And what sort of effects are we seeing in perfectly healthy young people that don't have pre-existing conditions, for example, or don't have a history of heart issues, suddenly finding that they're having these heart issues that really cannot, maybe they don't even show heart disease, but they're having the symptoms. So this is something that's raising my antenna. I think it's important to note that you're having some really big follow-up to this introduction of this study that happened just about 10 days ago. And on that, here's the tie to immigration. We were looking at what happened on the U.S. southern border. We get these sort of report cards every month about what happened in the previous month. And we are seeing, again, historically high levels of encounters at the U.S. southern border. So those are people coming across the border. They're either coming across the border illegally, they're coming across the border to seek asylum. They're viewed differently under U.S. law, depending on that designation. And over the course of the pandemic that started under the Trump administration, there was a policy that was being used that basically, if you were coming across the border and you were found to just basically be crossing the border illegally, you were immediately turned around, or pretty immediately turned around, and I can't use the term deported because it doesn't follow that. You're not going through a deportation proceeding, but you're being expelled quickly. And that's something that's unique under the pandemic. It was because of the pandemic that we were able to use that policy. There's some reporting to indicate that perhaps as we're seeing this pandemic, I don't want to say it too soon because we don't really know what the next couple months bring, but we have used certain emergency designations to allow for certain policies in states and cities, but also for the federal government. This Title 42 is under the federal government that allows this almost instant expulsion of somebody coming into the country illegally. And there's a question about whether or not that will be maintained as the pandemic evolves in America this year, and what sort of different immigration policies could we potentially see as we continue to have these really record high numbers of encounters, but maybe don't have that policy for quick expulsion. So I'm seeing reports of this. I want to make you aware of it. It's just another way that the pandemic could be impacting policies attached to major news stories. So we'll have more on that, including a side story about robo-dogs at the U.S. southern border. Have you seen this? I hadn't seen it. Robo-dogs. The robot stuff freaks me out. I don't know about you guys. I mean, whenever I see like the robot stuff related to the military, I'm like, oh Lord, the things that freak me out with my kids that have little robots around our house, let alone this. But yes, apparently there's some new defense strategy that could involve robo-dogs, and you'll see more of that on our website today. Interesting, just something to know. Questions and comments, let me know. I know it's a very busy news cycle and we're here to help you in any way, but hopefully this is helpful just to give you a little bit overview of what to watch for in Eastern Europe as we see different world leaders try to figure out what are the next steps, but really watching for evidence of a change of story. So we have a lot of talk. I think that's one of the big takeaways. We got a lot of talk. We got a lot of talk from a lot of people. In many ways, we have to wait and see what is actually happening on the ground and what's actually confirmed, and then what are the next steps. So that's usually great prudence for any story. All of your questions and comments, I love reading. And if you have any more, we have all of this linked to on our website. All right. Have a great day, guys. And we'll be here with more as news develops on smarternews.com. I'll talk to you later.